Hello, everyone. It's Rob here. Listen, it's YouTube. You know what to do. Hit the bell and the thumbs up, right? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. Hey, man, what's going on?
Oh, not much. Just hanging out. I was, getting caught up in all the middle parts and everything like that.
Yeah. We usually keep it pretty lighthearted in the first hour or so of this chat. We do.
I'm always watching. I'm usually like, if I troll, usually I'm just there to troll you about the Raptors when they lose.
Okay, yeah.
Be quiet about the Warriors when they lose. But
Well, I do seem to remember one certain team that we don't need to name.
I don't remember that.
Closing out another certain team's run at the historic arena.
No.
No, I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with any of that stuff.
It was fucked up. I was on a flight on like game 6. I was on a flight to North Carolina and for a comic convention, and Clay got injured because Danny Green jumped on his back tragically, horrifically. That coward jumped on his back in the middle of a dunk or something.
He was on an incredible run at that point too. That was very. And I was sweating.
I closed my phone. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah,
the pain's too real. Then the middle of the flight, I had like a breakdown on Twitter. Just like, fuck all of Canada.
Just give us this, please. We have so little.
You got it.
We have so little.
Yeah.
So how's it going? I know you got up like super early to do this. I feel like
it was like 7:30, but I was up at like 2 because I was just caught up in my normal like rhythms of just like working. And I usually work best when it hits like, midnight or something.
Yeah.
I'll be fucking around all day, and then when it hits midnight, I'm like, oh, I should start working now, for real.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the clock. I'm like 2:00. I told Rob I'd be on like 9 or something, or whatever you wanted to.
You can count.
And you were just like, yeah, from like 9 to 1. Well, Eastern time.
GM
I was like, oh
Robin
shit, all right. But it was fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy you made it, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate being asked. You asked me a long time ago, and I was like, yeah, whenever, but I didn't know what, I don't have any books coming out anytime soon, really.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned I was going to start a podcast, and then we did that. And so I was like, let me make sure the podcast doesn't suck before I tell anybody about it.
Yeah. Well, no, but I reached out a while ago just because I generally like following you. I talked about this with Aubrey Citizen when I had him on the show a couple weeks ago. I used to watch you guys on Aubrey's show on a Straight Shoot in like 2014, yeah. And I was like, damn, if one day I could get into the Straight Shoot, lifestyle, that would be pretty cool. Now here I am. I'm able to bring you guys onto this stream, and it's pretty cool. It's very exciting for me.
I used to think about that too. Like, fuck, I wish one day I could be on that Straight Shoot lifestyle.
Yeah.
Aubrey would I would just annoy him until he would have me on, and I was like fairly regular. Just by just annoying him, basically.
Yeah,
and he wanted to work with me at the time, so it was like he kind of had to,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, are you still into wrestling, or are you more lapsed now?
I'm lapsed. I think after like Trump won, and just like you just see like it was just blatant, like outright, and like the Saudi Arabia shit.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
I don't know about this. This feels kind of gross.
Yeah, no, same with me. Really, the Trump thing made it a lot of elements of like culture, but pro wrestling in general, I started taking on this kind of like dark ambiance to it that I didn't feel like I could really support anymore. Right.
Like randomly got back into like football, which is like maybe even more evil, but I was like, I'm allowed an indulgence.
Yeah.
But the wrestling thing, I also was like, I was like too into it. Like I was just tweeting about it too much.
Yeah, me too.
And like, yeah, so I was just like, but I still like it when I randomly see stuff. Like I'll watch AEW, and I did like, I designed Cody Rhodes' pants, like that he wears. Yeah. And
that's so cool.
I did like when they did like these posters, I got to draw like drawings of like John Moxley and like some other dudes that, like Christopher Daniels for DC and AEW, like a cross promo thing. So that was neat. But like, yeah, WWE, just like there's something about it that just feels too slick, too corporate. And like, especially now with that like weird Thunderdome thing they have, it feels like really like post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, it's very dystopian. Thanks for the 3 months, by the way, Nedlocked. Yeah, and I was going to say, it's not even about like, wrestling and the sort of the ties with the McMahon family and the Trumps and sort of the right-wing movement. But it's also the whole like wrestling business model, the Vince McMahon business model that I feel like is going national now, right? It's like with the whole
Right.
Prop 22 thing, all the big tech companies are taking that same strategy. It's like, oh yeah, we can just make these guys independent contractors. Then we don't have to have like a work week or benefits or any of that shit. And now that's
What's
like
funny
going,
is
that's taking
like
over the whole country.
That's the same work model that comics has been under, which is like
Yes.
fucked up and funny because that's like sort of what I agreed to do up front. You know what I mean? Like I was like, but I liked it at first because there's no entry level. Like I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to do anything. I just kind of was like posting shit online and I got a job. Well, that's pretty good. Like that's good freedom and stuff. But it would have been nice when I got the job that I had got like, benefits or some sort of able to like, have collective action or like bargaining power or anything like that. But comics doesn't have a union. Comics is just sort of like, it's been the Wild West. And like, that's why like similar to like pro wrestling, when I see more of the country go into that, I'm just like, oh, you don't want this.
Yeah.
Like my brother is a delivery driver and he's been independent contractor and his company, I think, is getting bought out by like some random company. Like, well, that's just Amazon. And it's not like they're going to pay anybody in that company more, It's just going to be more and more of the same bullshit.
Yeah. And well, it's the same thing with me too. It's like, it's pretty cool for me that I can make like a small income from talking shit into a webcam all day and setting my own hours and stuff like that. But yeah, at the same time, it could be cool to have like an actual like wage maybe, or not have to beg my viewers to give subs and donos and bits and like try to like guilt them about feeding my child and stuff in order to actually make a way. It would be cool to just like have that baked into it. But this is the new business model. This is the way we do stuff now.
Yeah, it was frustrating because I would get into arguments during the primaries. And you said I was a big Bernie guy in the little intro, but I would get into arguments with like these sort of lib, like comics writers specifically, because a lot of them are also like TV writers.
Yeah.
Were just like I don't even understand why you would say Bernie over like Warren or Biden, which the Biden one really pissed me off. But I'm just like, yo, our whole industry is built on like, freelancers not having healthcare and being under like the thumb of these employers. And like, the dream is to be under the thumb of like one employer, not like have a bunch of different like jobs that you have to like juggle.
Yeah.
And like the best like way that like, cause unionizing is so hard in comics because they can literally hire anybody from like the Philippines to like, like South Asia, like they're like South America, they're like artists are everywhere, and they like comics was kind of ahead of the curve in like just outsourcing that labor, but just trying to like convince these people who don't see it because they're all like comics writers' job that they don't really export those, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those all have to be sort of like American because they're doing like American stories generally.
Yeah, and similarly too, it's not like these are small. These are like multi-billion-dollar publishers that are at the head of this, that are profiting. They're the ones profiting the most from it, which makes it even more
Disney
egregious.
And Warner Brothers,
yeah,
it's AT&T, Warner, whatever the fuck, and like those are like when I was working for both companies, that's who was on the paycheck, and like everybody like they bought those companies for the IP so that they can make these shitty like Disney and Warner Brothers TV shows and movies and whatever the fuck. Like it was all about that. The comics are like a tax write-off. So
yeah.
Like we always like when the pandemic happened, comic sales didn't dip at all. People still were able to like either do pickups or mail order or like they found comic shops luckily found ways to get people comics if they wanted to read them. But we still were the ones that saw like, slashing budgets on like the companies being able to like hire people. The movies and TV shows didn't. They still just like they got bonuses because like, oh, streaming numbers are up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they had been looking for reasons to like cut budgets on comics for a long time. So
cool. Yeah. So what are you working on now? I imagine you have a couple things going on besides the podcast, but are you working on any specific like book or what do you have going on at the moment?
Yeah, I'm working on like I'm working at Bad Idea Comics, which is like it's a company that's new, and the idea is sort of like trying new stuff. Like basically, like I said, like the IP is the most valuable thing. All these guys, they were at a company called Valiant Comics. It's like kind of a, niche comics thing, and they sold it to a guys. They made a bunch of money, and then they just took their expertise, and like everybody that got bought out, they just went and started their own company to make their own things, basically. So I'm working for them, and I got like the first raise I've had, like significant raise I've had since I was in comics. And we talk about this kind of shit with like my editor. Like he'll call me and we'll just have like 3-hour conversations about how much like I hate comics. and then he'll be like, so how are the page? I'm like, oh, they're coming. Like they'll be, you'll get something soon. But it's fun though. It's a really cool comic. I'm like busting my ass drawing it, but it's like going to be the best thing I've ever done.
Cool. Very cool. We're gonna have to keep us updated on that. And so you mentioned you just started this podcast. So what's is it just a comics focused thing, this new podcast? Like what is it? Who are you talking to? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to get across with this podcast?
Yeah, thanks. So me and my buddy Daniel Irizarry, who's a Puerto Rican, he lives in Puerto Rico. He's a Puerto Rican comic artist in Puerto Rico, not like a New Yorican or something like that. He's like very specific about that. Okay. But he and I were both fans of podcasts, and we both watched like Michael Brooks, like his stuff a lot. Like he was like a frequent caller to Majority Report, and we were both like aligned politically. And as a comic artist, I spend like most of my day just sort of like trying to keep my attention focused on drawing. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, watch a lot of YouTube shit, Twitch channels, all that kind of stuff. But I got really just sort of like uninterested in comic books entirely in like the 4 or 5 years that I've been drawing them. So I basically was like, I should like he and I were talking. I was like, we should just start a podcast. That way we can sort of spread the sort of politics. Like I said, most comic creators are just sort of like lib brain, like idiots.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like, it's a nightmare. Like how many of these motherfuckers just like despise me because I'll just tweet about like Bernie Sanders or whatever. Yeah. But
shut up.
Like not even crazy shit. Just like, I like him. And there's like, how dare you? So we're like, we need an outlet to talk about this for comic fans that are like us, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And like a place that we can have on guests that also are sort of like similarly politically aligned, and we can just talk about the comic books, because they've been made by like these old white, conservative type liberal dudes for so long. Like we could just like make fun of the old comics and the politics in them, and the weird shit that they thought was cool in 2003, and just make jokes and use it to talk about things going on today. And so we have on like a lot of different types of voices in comics, like trans women. Like we had my buddy on who lives in like Belarus under like all the shit that's going on there. Like I said, Daniel's from Puerto Rico, and we have an episode coming up about like Puerto Rico with another Puerto Rican comic artist, and like the sort of neoliberal like I guess like the fuck shit going on with like Lin-Manuel Miranda. We had like a 2-hour episode about how much we hate that dude.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's just like a chance to sort of try and get people who like comics to sort of like hear things that they might not hear otherwise, because they don't listen to like The Insurgents or Chapo Trap House or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's really important too, considering how comics have become this culture war battleground too, right? Where it's like you have all these right-wing guys that are trying to bring that same kind of energy about fucking, the SJW stuff in my comic books and shit like that. And I've turned I've tried to, get all this clout based on like criticizing any effort for comic books to be more inclusive or more like left leaning or whatever. So I think it's cool to have a pushback against that, because that's really fucking annoying.
that's the other thing. Like for so long, it was like you're either just sort of like milquetoast Democrat, like that was the politics of mainstream comics, or the alternative was, like you said, like fringe alt-right dickheads.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you don't have an outlet, if people don't think there's an outlet for like that another like voice in that conversation, like, you know, there won't be one. So that's the other thing was like, we just thought that would be cool, especially mainstream comics. You'll find a lot of that in like, you know, alternative comics where people just don't know how to draw and shit. But like, you know, you have my art up right here. I can draw really well. So I just figured we should try to get that voice out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Well, that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so like the last episode that we did, we just talked about this comic book called Trouble from 2003, and like it was like a podcast where they were just like, oh, Aunt May fucked Peter Parker's dad, and it was like a weird like romance comic where it's just like teenagers fucking over and over, and like we really tried our best to like work it into some sort of politics stuff. There wasn't really a lot, so like that one was like kind of light, but we still worked in some stuff about that. But that's the idea, is like we could find weird old comics or like famous old comics and just find ways to talk about it in ways that, you know, like, talk to comics readers like they're adults and not children.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, that's cool, because I think that voice has been really lacking from these kinds of conversations. Have you had any fallback from the sort of Comicsgate right wing people? Because I know like our friend Aubrey has had to tangle with these people a lot. Have you had any like
not since
dealings
I started the
with these types? Yeah,
not since I started the podcast, but before, like when Aubrey would get attacked by alt-right, they were really mad at me too. Like it was really surreal in like the peak of like Gamergate, Comicsgate shit, like the sort of alt-right when they had their real moment like a few years ago, when every time me and my friend Tamara or our other friend would tweet something, there'd be like a 13-minute video going up on YouTube about like, I can't believe the SJWs think or say this. They like, if you still Google me, one of the top things that comes up is like my mom actually Googled me and found out that I was a racist because like some Comicsgate website wrote a thing, like probably similar to you and the MS-13 thing. It's just like, I said a joke about how if I was president, all white people would go into FEMA camps. And they were like, that's Ramon hates white people.
That's a completely reasonable statement to me. I don't know what the big fucking deal is with that.
I would be stoked if I got to go to a FEMA camp. If people like provided everything for me, like that would be sick.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the same thing with Aubrey. You know, like I did an interview with him on this show and put it up on YouTube and stuff. And if we try to search for it, it's just I don't think he wants probably us to get into the details of that because he's trying to move away from it. But it's just like, and he became such a target for these people, and it's just like, it's really, I mean, it's a really fucking stifling creative environment. I imagine if you're trying to like create something interesting. Like, do these people know that you can just like not read stuff? If someone's doing a comic book and you might not agree with the direction of it, you can just like read a different one or like do something else. It's just like it's incredible the amount of like vitriol these people have for like someone put like a fucking, you know, a person of color in this like, you know, comic book based on a toy line that I liked when I was 9 years old. Like we gotta turn this into like the biggest controversy in the country right now.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing is like a lot of the comics creators specifically that start like getting into comics, a lot of them do know that you cannot read like people can just choose not to read comics, because most of those motherfuckers, nobody reads their comics. Yeah, because they're like old and played out. So it's like Comicsgate like kind of morphed from like sort of right-wing reactionaries like you talked about, like those guys, into like a lot of comics artists that had no bits, that had no like real identity. They were just like old and like played out. So then they were like, oh, I know how I can get some people to like donate to an Indiegogo for my comic thing. And, you know, like, because they just market themselves as like, you know, oh, we care about consumers and all this bullshit. Like a lot of those people said Comicsgate wasn't about like anti-SJW stuff. It was about customer service and like people being polite to their customers.
Yeah. Well, that's what they said with the Gamergate stuff as well too, but a lot of it was also about just like screaming at people that you don't like.
Yeah, and like so I had a book come out and it was through a company called Vertigo. It was like part of DC Comics, and I was another person that like launched one of those was Zoe Quinn. So we had a conversation about it. Like, you know, she's a friend of mine now, and like just like talking to her after I watched the Gamergate stuff happen, and just like seeing, like hearing from her, like just firsthand what a nightmare that was, and knowing trans people in like my friend Tamara, who's like a frequent collaborator. We like work together all the time, and like just knowing how much that shit can just like really wreck somebody's life, and the fact that they go after specifically like vulnerable people, it's like really disgusting. And then for them to try and say like, oh yeah, no, it's just about, you know, customer service or you know, ethics and game journalism. It's just
exactly. And yeah, King Uendo making a point in the chat as well. The alt-right thinking comics are their thing, when both big comic names today had their characters beating Nazis and fascists and beating Hitler's ass in the post-war period. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the disconnect between what these people think about comics and what they like about it's just so crazy. Like that's the other thing is like when I started drawing comics, it was just like for fun. I would just put the shit on like Tumblr and Twitter and DeviantArt and all these places, but I didn't think that I would get a job doing it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I didn't grow up reading comics. I just like to draw, and then I like to draw comic book characters because I grew up in the 90s, you know, with the middle parts and everything. Like that was the illest shit to draw, was like that fucking haircut. And like I just like to draw cool shit, basically.
Yeah.
So when I got into comics, it was kind of like, oh shit, like I didn't realize that there were sort of like unwritten rules to like behavior. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I didn't follow them to a lot of people. Like I would talk out of turn sometimes, and I try to be respectful, but I just wouldn't know. Like a lot of these people, they just feel like there's very specific ways you should behave, and I just didn't, you know, I just did whatever the fuck I wanted. Like, you know, like a lot of these things I just do like redesigns where I'm just like, yeah, I don't care if that's how the person drew. I want to draw it what I think is cool.
Yeah, well, that's what I really like about your art that we're looking at right now. It's like you have all these classic characters, and you can like it's such an identifiable style, and the way that you like take these very classic characters who are very familiar with the in terms of the costumes and stuff, and give it this kind of update. It's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's just like trying to like synthesize things that I think like are neat or like interesting, and trying not to like just fall back on like, and I'm a big fan of a lot of comics, you know, but I just didn't grow up reading them. I fell in love with them like later in life because I grew up really poor. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's funny too, like all the gatekeepers about that stuff, like the alt-right sort of assholes that have a lot of like they don't want you to play with their toys, basically. So like even though there's a lot of stuff that they hate that I'm just like not a fan of too, like I'm not like, oh, you shouldn't be writing those comics or whatever. Like, yeah, just do whatever the fuck you want. Like this shit is not important at the end of the day. That's the other thing that I really feel like a lot of these people, on like all of them, just feel like this shit is the most important thing. And I'm like, no, it's like fifth or sixth more important in my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. What do you think about, because you mentioned how a lot of the people that do comics are like sort of lib brain types, and how also like companies like Marvel are like, the comic part is almost like a tax write-off, where what the real money is like the big multi-billion-dollar Marvel Studios pictures and everything like that. So have you been doing anything in the work you've been doing to like push back against, because it's not like, you know, these comics aren't right-wing, but the things like the Marvel movies who have become part of like kind of manufacturing consent for like the American like imperialism and the police state, and basically being, you know, the subtext of a lot of this stuff is like, we need these like heroes to be able to subvert all these like civil rights laws, and you know, we basically need like superheroes as just being like cops, basically, who we need to unleash them to defeat all the bad guys. Is that something that like you're trying to push back against at all, or like do you see that issue as well?
Well, we like talking about it on the podcast, you know, like there's only so much I can do as like a creator because I don't like write my stuff. Like, you know, I'm not a comics writer, I'm a comics artist. So like a lot of it is just like, oh, here's the script. And like, I've been pretty fortunate that most of the books I've worked on have been like pretty solid politically. Some of them just have like no politics, and that's fine too. But yeah, like on the podcast, I feel like we get to really talk about that, and like, you know, just like even just tweeting about it or like talking to, like, there was something I saw in a book recently by a friend of mine that I was just like, oh, like we were going to talk about the kids in cages stuff. There was some stuff that was like made me real squeamish about that. And I'm just like, I don't know if this is the take that you should have or would want to get across. Like if you thought about it past like what, you know, like this initial first step, but it's something that because it's a friend of mine, I can have a conversation with the guy about it. And I don't want to like blow his shit up on Twitter, you know?
Yeah.
But like, yeah, like I think just talking about it and getting people's eyes more open to it. Cause I know like for a long time I was the same way. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, this like Batman, you know, beats the shit out of people. That's cool. And you know, it is cool, but it's cooler when those people are cops. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like one of the episodes we did is Dark Knight or All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, which was like a book that everybody when it came out hated. I loved it. I thought it was sick. But like the first 4 issues of it is Batman just like killing cops and like making Robin eat a rat. Like nothing else happens really. And so we talked about that, and we like after years of people just shitting on it, we were just like, oh, isn't that like one of the best Batman comics ever made?
Yeah.
The whole message is like, fuck the cops, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, that's been one of the weird things. Yeah, I guess getting more into leftism and learning more about that stuff. And then you start seeing a lot of these like classic characters that you liked when you were a kid in kind of this different light. And you have Peter Parker or Spider-Man or whatever, just like beating the shit out of these guys robbing a jewelry store or something. And it's like, well, what are they like? That jewelry store is insured. Like what difference does it make to Spider-Man if these guys are stealing jewels or not? Like, it's fucking just let them go. They probably need the money.
Yeah, like the that Spider-Man movie with the most recent one. I did see that one. I try to avoid most of the superhero movies just because I don't care, and they're usually not that good, you know. But that I watched the recent Spider-Man one, and the whole thing was like Vulture, his business went under because of the attacks from the Avengers. And he's like mad at the Avengers. Like, yeah, he has every right to be mad.
100% correct. Yeah.
And like watching the Dark Knight Rises, and like Bane's whole thing is like, fuck Wall Street, fuck these like, you know, global elitists and all this shit. Like I stop with him when he's talking about like blowing up the city. But when he when he abolished all the prisoners and everything, I'm like, hell yeah, Bane rules. Like Bane is sick.
Yeah, we were talking about this on the last stream actually, because it's like it seems like in a lot of these comic book movies, or with Killmonger is the other big example of that, and how so many people came out of that movie being like, damn, that guy made a lot of good points. But it's like the creators of these movies have to go out of their way to have them, even though they're like have these origins that make sense and like are completely legitimate. But it's like, oh, we got to have them do something like super evil just so we don't have anyone get any confused about you know, who's the bad guy in this situation. So we just gotta have them like blow some shit up or just shoot their girlfriend or like do something fucked up that ensures that everyone understands that we're not supposed to be like empathizing with this guy.
I remember when Dark Knight Rises came out, and it was like right in the middle of Occupy Wall Street, and it just felt super uncomfortable in the theater watching like the bad guy be the guy who was like talking about taking over the city from like the, you know, the people who have always ran it and like kept people starving and in jail and shit. And I was like, wait, why is he the bad guy? Like, why am I rooting for Batman, who's just like had everything handed to him and like can't get over one trauma that he's had to live with? I mean, granted, it's a big deal, but I mean, come on. He's rich. Like, get over it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people unfortunately tragically lose their parents, and they don't just go around like beating up like thugs or whatever, giving blunt force trauma concussions to these guys that are probably just trying to like, you know, deal with the same economic system that he's benefiting from.
Yeah, like so, like a lot of the old comics that we've read so far, there's almost always some like weird shit that like feels like they're talking about like Jeffrey Epstein or like the CIA, because like that language of like the CIA and like hidden societies, like that's been in our culture for a long time. but just like as a person reading them, I never contextualized it in the way I do, like since I listen to like True Anon or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're just like, in our podcast, we're just trying to like make those connections and like try to do learning on the spot of like things that were like, you know, oh, here's a place that's referenced. I don't know about that. Let me read about it. I'm like, what the fuck? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that was the uncomfortable thing about watching Wonder Woman 84. We reviewed that for the podcast. Otherwise, again, I didn't watch the last Wonder Woman movie. There would have been no way I watched this one. But in this new one, they have Max Lord, who's like this Chilean guy who is an immigrant who came, you know, in the United States, and he gets picked on when he's a kid. And because of that, he wants to like not be poor. And so the way he starts a business, and the business idea is like, he wants to buy oil plots so that people who invest in it, sort of like the shit that's going on with like, you know, the GameStop and all these like stock things, is like, what if everybody that was poor just put in their money and they owned the resources, or they took power back from like the global elites? And then it's like, no, that's bad. That's cheating. You can't do that. Like, and the subtext of that is like, in the comics, Wonder Woman broke that guy's fucking neck. Like, famously, she killed that guy. So the whole movie I'm watching, like, is she going to break this dude's fucking neck for like trying to provide a better life for his kid? And like, eventually she just gets him to like renounce his wish or whatever. But the message is like, don't try for anything more than what you have. Just be happy being like a fucking father to an ethnically ambiguous child. Don't strive for anything more than that. And they try to say that if you do, you're like Trump, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. Yeah, and that's funny because you mentioned the GameStop thing, and now that there's like, you know, these market forces are intervening to ensure that none of the plebs can like profit from this system that these people have been using as casino for, you know, generations. There's literally like Redditors dressing up as the Joker to go down to like the Peter Pan, what the fuck is it called? The Robin Hood app play headquarters to like mesh it up. It's a very funny convergence between like the comic book world and real life.
Yeah. I mean, like that just like shows like how much of like that. When I remember when I first got into like going to conventions and stuff, it was still pretty niche and stuff. And I got into it like sort of right after the financial meltdown, like 2008. So it was kind of like a dead area, right? But I remember seeing people dressed like Rorschach and the Joker and like all this stuff as it was bubbling up. And now it's everywhere in culture. And like you said, like a lot of the movies being able to like just manufacture consent or like get across these like horrible politics to people. Like Wonder Woman got nominated for like 8 Oscars or whatever because that's like the only movie that came out. You know what I mean? Like that's the only one that Warner Brothers was like, yeah, we'll put out a thing that everybody's going to watch. Like, and it happened to have these horrible politics in it. And for a long time, nobody gave a shit about that. You know what I mean? Like when Rorschach was hot, that like those couple years, like nobody really cared or knew what that meant, like broadly. You know what I mean?
Like he's not the good guy in this story. Like we're not supposed to be empathizing with Rorschach.
Yeah. And now they have like a Rorschach comic where it's like it's written by a guy who was in the CIA, and so it's like really strange. Like comics culture in general is like a really strange place because like the guy, there's a writer in comics who like has talked about he was in the CIA, he was in like Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever. And like I've read some of his comics that I like, but like on some level you wonder, like, is he just there to like get these horrible ideas into the world? That way they could skip the step of like rewriting these stories to make a movie. Like he's working on a movie with like Ava DuVernay, and the whole thing just feels like he's like a West Wing kind of guy, like the show, you know? Yeah. That's the kind of dude he is. So like the whole thing just feels like it's a way to just like subvert the culture without having to worry about people who are like going to do things that aren't like exactly in line. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Wonder Woman is a good example too, because then you have the like alt-right Comicsgate people that hate that because it's like, it's like you're making this thing about women and female empowerment, and like they got super mad at like the fact that there was a screening that was like just for women. That one guy like got super pissed off about this,
Yeah.
And then you have liberals saying it's this wonderful, inspiring thing because it's about, for that exact reason, it's about female empowerment and stuff. And then you have people on the left being like, well, I don't like it because it's like she's a fucking Zionist who was in the IDF. And it's like,
Right.
like we shouldn't be glorifying this like person who, talked about how great the Israeli military was, like as they were bombing children's hospitals and shit. And there's, in comic books and in culture in general, there's less space for that kind of attitude. You have the right has a lot of representation. You have the West Wing lib brain has a lot of representation, but on the left, you don't really have as much representation in culture.
The book that I'm working on now and the next one, which I'm co-writing, the politics feel like good, and it feels like I have like a control over it. You know what I mean? Like when I was doing the other stuff, it is like I get paid to do a job, and this one I feel like I have more like collaboration with like the way, like especially the one I'm going to be co-writing. Like if knock on wood, I get to do that. But like it almost doesn't matter because people like that read comics care about like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man intentionally, right? Like that's the companies have always sort of made it about the character, not the creator, because when they made superstar creators, those guys left and formed their own companies.
Yeah.
They made all the money. That was like a whole thing in the 90s with Image Comics and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just in their interest to like pump IP out. And so what that IP is, it just feels like, yeah, it's just like people at Langley are just telling them like, do this. And it's like, all right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels more so when you have a guy who was literally in the CIA.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to not be conspiratorial about it.
Seriously,
which is,
yeah.
I on my show, I call myself like an outlaw of comics just because like as a bit, because like, a bunch of reasons, but like it does feel that way often. Like I'm just on the fringe enough that way I don't have to like, I don't have to do that shit anymore. And it feels kind of good, at least for now anyways.
Yeah.
If I have to go back to Marvel and DC to make some money, I'll do it. But
yeah. So you said you were like a big Bernie guy.
Yeah.
Which obviously didn't really turn out the way we all wanted it to. What do you think about what's been going on with Biden so far? Because a big thing with the libs, as you know, I'm sure, was like, if you ever criticized Joe Biden at any time over the last year, they said, well, do you not care about the kids in cages? Trump is putting kids in cages, which is that's a very legitimate thing to be upset about. But now it seems like, now that Biden is the president of the United States, all of a sudden the liberals, like online on Twitter or wherever, and then on MSNBC, who often enjoyed talking about that kind of stuff, seem to be like less anxious about ensuring that this injustice is like corrected right away.
Well, I heard Dr. Joe Biden's on the case. That's first and foremost. I don't know. I imagine her like, where in the world is Carmen Sandiegoing all these kids back to their parents? Yeah. Like they put out a thing saying like, yeah, Dr. Joe Biden, she's going to get it done. And I'm like, well, fuck, I have faith in her. There's 600 kids, but I heard if Dr. Joe Biden is on the case, then, then we're in a good spot. But, but the whole Biden administration has been a lot about like giving concessions and then putting asterisks at the end of it. Sort of like that Raptors title. It's like, here's the thing, but here's a little asterisk at the end of it.
Okay.
Because it's like the $2,000 checks thing. They like say, here it is, but actually that 600 counted. And
maybe it's going to be, it was going to be at the door immediately, and now it's going to be maybe March, April. Who knows when it's going to be there? Maybe never.
Yeah, they put in a new guy at the head. The new guy that he hasn't got confirmed yet, but Ali Mayorkas. They're like, here's a guy. He's the first Latino ever head of Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, great.
We're not going to get rid of it, but we're going to put a Latino in charge. The fucking Cuban.
Yeah.
Like it's not like, it's not somebody who's like, it was a guy too who,
he's one of these Castro took away my grandparents' plantation and shit. I'm like, guys,
it wasn't, I don't know if it was quite that, because his parents, I know, so I felt bad about this because we had a Thanksgiving episode when that was first announced. So I just read the New York Times article and like, tried to figure out who this guy was.
All this.
And
afternoon, comrades.
Like, he's Latino in the sense that he was born in Cuba, but his mom is Jewish and his dad is Jewish, and they just met in Cuba and then they left.
Okay. Okay.
So like, like, yes, technically Latino,
Okay.
but more accurately,
He gets in on a technicality. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the asterisk I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, so like, and it's just like, it's so full with things like that. Like, they put out the immigration policy where it's like, oh, we're gonna, like, give a pathway to citizenship for like all the DACA recipients, but it'll be 8 years, and we're not really rushing to get that passed.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean? And like, I think there was like reports out where they were just like, yeah, like, it's something that we want to do. We'll see when it happens.
Yeah,
like, they're not.
We're going to form an advisory board to take a look at that, and we'll make sure it's diverse and bipartisan. Any day now, I'm sure they're going to be all over that.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same with Obama, and it's been the same with like any Democratic administration, which is they pay lip service to that kind of shit, like immigration reform, because the opposite, like, the only other alternative is the Republican Party, who like actively hates immigrants and like Latinos, and so like, they're like, you don't really have a choice, but we're going to pay you lip service, especially because like Biden was getting. Like, it's kind of forgotten that Biden was getting crushed by Latino activists in the primaries. Like, every time he would do one of those town halls, they would show up and like have kids in cages outside the thing, and like he'd be
like, "Vote for Trump, Jack." That was his answer to that. Good job. Okay,
so
Joe.
It was like, yeah, they couldn't have made that more clear that they actually like don't really give a fuck, but they have to like kind of put on a good face about it, just that way people don't fucking get on their ass. But like, they won't expend any political capital to make it happen. So like, until I see it, I'm not going to believe it, and I have a lot of friends, because in the primaries, I told them, like, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, fuck him. And there are a lot of friends like, oh, you have to vote for him. You have, like, what if this, what if that? So I basically voted for Joe Biden just for the rhetorical argument, just so I could say, well, I voted for him. Where's the stuff?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, this affects me. I'm a Joe Biden voter. I can't believe that he would fuck me like this. This is crazy.
Yeah, I can't believe
it. They love it, actually. They can't get enough of me throwing that vote in their face every time he does something that's not good. But no, like, it's the lib brain stuff of like, oh, we love Elizabeth Warren even though she said like we need ICE. That I lost so many followers over attacking Elizabeth Warren, but I'm like, don't blame me. I'm not the one who snaked out on this shit. She snaked out on this shit. And
though pretending to be a Native American for several decades was also kind of fucked up. And it's like probably not something you can just like paper over. Yeah.
I'm willing to forgive that because she does have high cheekbones. We have to admit that.
Jesus Christ.
Let's not acknowledge her face, her bone structure.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. No, but okay, so that's another thing though that I wanted to bring up, because like with when it comes to the Biden stuff and kids in cages and all that, and for sure, like I would never argue that Donald Trump's like family separation policy was fucking barbaric and like intentionally cruel, like being intentionally cruel to fucking children, like the most vulnerable people in the like people that we should be protecting at all costs. Of course, that's extremely fucked up. But then when you have the contrast with Joe Biden, who with Obama oversaw a immigration system where they deported 2.5 million people throughout those 8 years, which is significantly more than the number of people that Donald Trump deported. And it's like, that's where the disconnect with the liberal brain happens too, because it's like, you don't think any families were getting separated in that process, in those 2.5 million people? Like, I know they always tell themselves that, I'm sure these were just the bad immigrants who like, they were the gangbangers and drug dealers and stuff. But like, I'm sure like a huge majority of those people were just like random people that have lived in America for decades who had like a dime bag charge from years ago, or some fucking jaywalking violation that put them on the bad list. And then they get deported. And that's why it's like, there's not, even though Donald Trump's immigration policies were fucking barbaric, there's not a huge amount of daylight between those policies and what the policies that people like Joe Biden have supported throughout their whole careers, which is what the libs they can't quite wrap their brains around this idea.
Yeah, well, I can't remember specifically, but I think that was one of my problems with the Ali Mayorkas, like making him the head of DHS, because he was a guy who made like financial crimes, like something that made it like a a thing worth going after. Like if somebody faked a social security number, then they were like they were on the same level as like a violent offender and shit. And that, you know, I don't want to say that for sure because I don't remember that was like we did that on Thanksgiving. That was so long ago. But I remember it was some fucked up shit like that. And you know, like luckily, like, you know, your boy Jordan, he's like one of the people that still talks about it, still cares about it. All these other people like that claim they cared about it. It was just a rhetorical argument for them.
Yeah, and they've
like
all been jumping down Jordan's throat lately because he's been trying to pressure Biden on this. And of course, all the same liberals that were saying this repeatedly, they're all like, "Well, how dare you bring this up? And you're just helping Trump by doing this." And it's like, or whatever, you know, it's just bullshit.
There was a dude who it was like our first real like enemy of our podcast. It was this guy named Dan Slott, and he's a comics writer. He worked on a bunch of stuff. He's been like a Marvel lifer though. He's a guy who Marvel and Disney Plus, they have like a little show called Marvel 606 where they highlight different like aspects of like the Marvel fandom or whatever. And he's like a writer who was on that show. And they did a whole thing about like what a goofy little guy he is. Cause he's like, you know, he's pretty short and he's like a little dude. And he's from Stockton, the town that I live in now. And he was a guy who this is like very lib brain, very weird little dude. And when I found out he was from here, I just like my stomach kind of dropped. And I just like went on a deep dive of his whole, like, you know, I didn't try to like out him or expose him or like do like one of those kind of things, you know, like I don't really do shit like that, but I was fascinated. And I remember looking up like all the instances that he had talking about kids in cages. Like that's a big problem that he had. And it was like 60 something times. It was a lot. Like it was a real favorite go-to, no matter if he's arguing with someone on the left or someone on the right. He was able to say like, oh, so I guess you don't care about kids in cages.
Yeah.
Then I looked up how many times he talked about ICE, like as something that, you know, we should deal with to keep kids from getting in cages. Because it's like a mostly unregulated, like arm of our government. They're doing,
which is recent too. It's not even that old. Shit. Yeah.
Just 2003. And there was one instance where he even talked about them at all. And it was just to say that even though Trump claimed that they endorsed him, they actually didn't endorse him. Like, don't be mean to ICE. Like they didn't really endorse this guy. And what also tripped me out, because I did some like, he was on this show and it made him look like a real goof. And so I was making fun of it. And like people were like, that's not fair. That's not the real Dan Slott. So I watched an interview with him and he went on a Comicsgate live stream to try and like bridge the gap between him and a dude who was like at Trump's inauguration. Like that's how right wing this guy is. Like a complete MAGA chud. He's like the head guy, but he used to draw Green Lantern and shit. So this guy wanted to like try to build a bridge politically. So he went on this guy's show and he talked about, he's from Stockton. He talked about his dad worked for the Shell Company in the 70s in Modesto. So I Google what was Shell doing in the 70s in Modesto, and they were making pesticides and like fumigants for field workers, like to so that, you know, for crops. And he never, I think he would have never thought critically of this. But when I did more research, like Shell got sued for putting cancerous toxins inside their chemicals. And I'm like, it's so ironic that he and I grew up maybe 20 minutes from one another. And his view of the town that I live in, this is like the most ethnically diverse town in all of America, just by numbers. His view of it was like a white suburb because his dad drove to Modesto every day to make these fumigants that were like literally giving people, not like in my direct family, but people like me, you know, like, or some people that were in my family, giving them cancer. And he, you know, and then for him to like, you know, years later talk about kids in cages, like he gives a shit about migrants. I was like, that's disgusting. So I tweeted about that and he blocked me, which I thought was unfair. He didn't even want to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Does he not respect the marketplace of ideas or what?
Yeah. Somebody said he waddles. He does waddle. He's a little waddler.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting thing because like he had also got into it by like saying some shit against trans people. So we had or like one of his books pissed off like the trans comics community, which is pretty big. It's like a pretty robust community in comics. And it like instead of talking to them about it, he was just like, no, we're not having that conversation. He like shut it down. He doesn't care about that shit. So, I'm not surprised. But then to me, like if you're that kind of dude, don't talk about kids in cages. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
easy. Just like you find some other trick,
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think that's been the really, really gross thing about how that's been exposed over the last couple months of just how many people were just like using that as a cudgel to beat Trump with, without actually like giving a fuck about the actual kids that they're talking about. And just the unwillingness, I think, to examine their own complicity in that exact system is so telling as well, right? It's just like they literally supported this stuff when it was going on, when it's a guy that has a D next to his name that's doing it, and we're using it as a political weapon now. And it's fucking gross that people are willing to do that to like win political battles online, basically.
Colonialism and capitalism and all that shit, like it's so deep rooted in culture that you don't even think about it until like you're forced to, you know what I mean? And like the stuff that's been going on with like Wall Street, all that shit, like when I think a lot of it during the Biden administration, which is different than the Obama administration, I guess because of the internet or whatever, like it's just bigger. Like more people are seeing that and are like just kind of tired of it, which is nice, right? Like
yeah.
The leftist voices are not as big as they were then as they are now, because just we're at the end of the American empire. So people have to think critically about that shit. They can't just be like, oh, Parks and Rec is a great show. Like government is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's another thing about the Biden approach too, which is that talking about Obama's immigration policy and like the fucking horror they inflicted on a lot of these immigrant communities, like they were being terrorized by ICE in the exact same way that they have been throughout the Trump era. The whole point of doing that was to like build credibility with the right? The right who like hates immigrants and wants them all to go. Because Obama felt like, oh, once I deport 2.5 million people and like, have these fucking stormtroopers going up and busting up people's families and doing a lot of the same shit that has been happening under Trump. Once I do that at this huge unprecedented level, then that's going to like buy me credibility with the right. They're going to know that I'm serious about immigration reform and this shit. And then they'll work with me on like bipartisan immigration reform that's going to like help the good immigrants, the DACA recipients and the dreamers and such. And you just saw how he was rewarded by that, which is like they did not change their rhetoric in one way. They did not work with him on one fucking thing. It bought nothing, and all he did was inflict so much fucking punishment and misery on these immigrant communities, and it got nothing in return.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing too. Is like my grandfathers both came over to this country, undocumented. They came over illegally, and they both built families. And eventually my parents met. And I came around. Toxic individual that they created. So maybe these people have a point, but like when they talk about this and like, I think a lot of those people have a disconnect of thinking about this is their family. This could be them. Right. Like when I hear it, I think that could be my mom that's sleeping on the floor of like a jail cell. And so the disconnect is totally different. And it's something where like I said, my co-host is from Puerto Rico, and like, I never thought critically about what Puerto Ricans actually want. Like I assumed like most people like, yeah, they probably want to be a state. Like, why wouldn't they? And then I talked to people from Puerto Rico and they're like, we fucking hate the idea of becoming a state. Like, why would we want to be a state? Like Americans have already shown they don't give a fuck about us except for like how they can, drain us, like squeeze us of any resources we have, make us completely dependent on them as a colony. Like, why would we want statehood? So that was like our next episode is about that and how like Lin-Manuel Miranda and these other, like, there's a comic writer who's also named something Miranda, and like how they're just sort of like the same. It's the same sort of thing of like they like people just assume what Latinos want in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's like they're framing Puerto Rican statehood as a way to help the Democratic Party win more elections, and not like what do the actual people that live in Puerto Rico actually want. Like that's not really factored into the equation. It's just like how does this help the Democratic Party win more Senate seats and congressional seats, pretty much.
And with Latinos, like with like, you know, like Mexican Americans, that a lot of those people assume that the only issue is the immigration reform. But like when I was door knocking for Bernie and shit, that was like fifth on the list. Like Latinos in America are the youngest generation, so they're a bunch of people looking to go to college. They can't afford it, right? Because they mostly are like low income. They're the most uninsured, like healthcare wise, populace in the States. So like there are like real issues that affect everybody broadly that are like top concern to them. And also, yes, we would like to be treated like human beings.
Yeah,
but
ideally, yeah.
But like, you know, material interests matter to these people. That's why, like, that's the other thing about like libs is they assume like we can placate you with a face or a name like Ali Mayorkas, then you'll be good, you'll be pacified, you'll be fine. But like material conditions matter as much, if not more. And that's why I think a lot of people don't understand why like class versus politics are a way to like prevent the rise of fascism more than just like woke neoliberalism.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. A lot of the same people that were talking about kids in cages constantly during the Democratic primary, when Latinos overwhelmingly supported Bernie Sanders because of all these like material policies that you're talking about that would have helped them their material conditions. When they supported him overwhelmingly, these same liberals that talk endlessly about kids in cages were like, shh, no, like we don't want to hear from you right now. No, thank you. Yeah. This is you're actually exposing yourself as being white privileged bros by the fact that you're supporting this guy who's like trying to give you healthcare and access better education and like improve your quality of life in measurable ways. That's a white bro thing to me.
Yeah, when they were when the numbers were coming in and it was all like young Mexican people and they're like voting overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders, I remember just thinking like, oh, here we go. Like there's all these people that just listen to Chapo Trap House. That's the problem.
Yeah,
like it's just that they have an insane amount of like, young Mexican listenership or young Latino listenership. That's why they're voting for Bernie Sanders, not because they can't afford healthcare, they can't afford college, they can't afford to live in this country anymore.
Yeah.
But they don't want to hear that shit. They just want to think that they're just being manipulated by this bullshit.
Yeah, of course. Well, Ramon, I appreciate you coming on the stream, man. It was good to talk to you about all this stuff. Do you want to just plug the podcast and plug whatever you need to plug before we sign off here?
Oh yeah. Well, you can follow me at Ramon Villalobos on Twitter. Look out for, I think later this year, maybe early next year. I can't remember for sure, but I have a book coming out that we haven't announced yet at Bad Idea Comics, Bad Idea Hello on Twitter. And then our podcast, which is what I'm doing, like, actively, regularly to like keep my name out there.
Yeah.
Is Mex Flintallo at Flintalo, because somebody else got Mex Flintallo first. FLENTALLO, and we have a Patreon and whatever. But yeah, if you listen to the podcast or whatever, that'd be cool. But yeah, I really appreciate it, Rob. Hey, and if I don't know if you read comics, but if you ever want to come on, let me know, because that would be cool too.
I will. I have comic periods where I've never been like a huge like diehard comics guy, but I've definitely enjoy them.
Yeah,
and I like talking about it. It's fun. It's a cool part of culture that I don't think gets explored a lot, especially considering how much comic books inform our current pop culture, right? It's like everything is comic books, but so we don't actually pay much attention to the actual books that are leading to this stuff.
I remember when like a long time ago, it'd be cool to see somebody with like a comic book shirt and it was like, oh wow, they're like, they get it. They're like me. And now it's just like, holy shit, this is exhausting.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, man, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. I watched this. It's very subversive.
Yes, everyone knows this. Yeah, many say this.
I think I'm glad you put the beanie back on because that's more subversive. And I know you were struggling. That's the weird thing, by the way. Like, I don't understand people who like really like you look the same every single time I see you in any place. But yeah, you're some days you're like, I'm having a good or bad hair day, and it's like, how have you noticed?
Well, it's a big part of that is just being a massive toxic narcissist like me. And once you're one of those, then these things start to become more apparent.
I guess.
Thanks for coming on, Ramon. We'll do it again sometime, and I'll keep in touch. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
All right, take care, man.
Later.
That was Ramon, everybody. That was fun. Do you notice how I on the fly producer stuff put together this image slideshow of Ramon's work? What do you think about that? That was pretty impressive, huh? All right, that's the end of the video, everyone. Thank you for watching it. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up, hit the bell, leave a comment or whatever, or don't, and I'll talk to you soon, okay? All right, bye.